Well, hello, everybody. I got a short one today, just a few slides. And we are, of course, now in the post World War One era, and it's an era of change, a lot of change, and really a lot of change socially. Of course, there's lots of economic change as well, but really a lot of social change is what at least we're going to focus on here for a little bit. Really, big things are new roles for women, again, both socially, which is the main focus, and economically. And you'll see there's a very close relationship with being able to be independent economically and how that affects one's ability to act socially. Increased integration of the races, but remember, we're still a very much segregated society at this point in time, particularly in the South, although there are some areas that are less segregated than others. So these are two huge things that are changing. And as then we also see more permissive attitudes about previously off limit subjects. Now remember, we're talking about the 1920s now. And while we see, on TV, there's, all sorts of sex, talk about, birth control or pregnancy, things like that. Cussing is even on some non-cable TV shows, but obviously, Netflix and stuff like that, and even showing smoking and drinking and nowadays drug use in all sorts of movies and stuff is displayed. It seems, but these are things that you see that would never be. You would never talk about them in decent society, as the term was. And it was really, for some people, quite a shock. And you can probably hear the old folks saying, "Oh, kids these days, I can't believe what they're doing. Look how they're dressing." And believe me, that's not just us saying that right now as adults. It's been said by every generation to every kid. And as you can see, even different dressing styles, which I guess apparently these are considered very short skirts, and I don't know. I'm not a fashion expert by any means, but there's also, as we'll see, an increased toleration of alternative lifestyles, including homosexuality. Now remember, none of this is widely accepted. We're talking about the beginnings, increased toleration, more permissive. It doesn't mean it's totally accepted. It just means that this is the start of it becoming more accepted into society. And of course, in some locations of the country, these topics are no big deal. No one really cares. And in other sections of the country, then these are like the most important things you could ever think about. I mean, we know you guys probably don't remember, but there's a huge thing about should you be forced to bake a cake for a same-sex couple, and it's like in California, I don't really think anyone cares, but in other parts of the country, it's like a huge, huge, huge deal. So interesting though. All right. Well, we also have some groups that really did not like any sort of change, and they vehemently and very strongly opposed such change. One, unfortunately, you've heard of, which of course is the Ku Klux Klan, as you probably know, originated after the Civil War as a terrorist group. They certainly were a terrorist group. In fact, the original goal was to terrorize freedmen and their supporters. Now, when we say this version, what we mean by that is that the KKK obviously was very prominent at some points, and then went down, and then rising again, and then went down again, and each time they came out with a slightly varied message. This version of the KKK in the 1920s, their message was a vow to protect female purity and racial purity, and I'm not really sure what either of those mean, but that's another topic altogether. As we know, Klansmen use what they called vigilante, and we say justice in quotes, to enforce their version of how society should be. Vigilante means that you take the law into your own hands, that you don't go to court, you don't, give anyone any sort of rights or trial or anything. You are essentially the judge, jury, and executioner, which unfortunately happened quite a bit. Particularly in the South and some parts of the Midwest, where the KKK was very strong. Another group were nativists, and nativists are people that want preferential treatment for American born people. So if you're born in the United States, then you should get special treatment according to nativists. And just tell me if, or stop me if this sounds familiar. I mean, and this is when we say that society repeats itself, or society, I'm sorry, history repeats itself over and over again. And it's just so true here. Listen, blamed immigrants for the moral decay and other problems faced by society. Boy, does that sound familiar. Um, felt that immigrants were spreading radical ideas such as communism, socialism, and anarchy. Maybe not quite so much now, but we get the ideas that we don't want, their ideas coming here. I mean, we hear that rhetoric all the time now, and believed that immigrants who are willing to work for lower wages will force Americans' wages down. Now, there happens to be some truth to this. I don't know if you guys remember or have heard of Cesar Chavez. He actually made the exact same argument. But, however, Cesar Chavez said that illegal immigrants, not normal, regular, legal immigrants, and I think that's something for whatever reason just gets missed. Well, nativists are against legal immigration, which is bizarre unless you were actually, born here originally, like your ancestors. I mean, we all pretty much immigrated here, so that's very bizarre for me to understand. Finally, we get to the fundamentalists. And a fundamentalist, and it can be in any religion. It doesn't in this case, it just happens to be in Christianity, but a fundamentalist can be in any religion. And it's a person who believes in the literal, meaning word for word interpretation of the Bible, as opposed to being figurative, meaning that, oh, it's a story and you should just take the lessons from the story. Literal means no, every single word is 100% true. They worked again for spiritual purity, which I'm not really sure what that means. And it really came to a head in what's known as the Scopes trial. You may have heard it referred to derogatively as the monkey trial, which of course it wasn't at all about that. Long story short, took place in Dayton, Tennessee, a small Tennessee town. There's a law called the Butler Act, which made it illegal to deny the biblical account of man's origin, meaning creation. You have to teach creationism. You can't teach something that's against creationism. You can't deny the biblical account of man's origin. Well, John Scopes, who happened to be, I think he was actually a substitute teacher for PE, but at any rate, he taught evolution in biology class. Even though it was in the state's textbooks, they felt it violated the Butler Act. Williams Jennings Bryan was the prosecuting attorney. Clarence Darrow was the defense attorney. Long story short, Scopes was found guilty. The verdict was overturned on a technicality, and unfortunately, we still have this issue today. What some states are arguing that they should teach creationism and in place of evolution, and you just wonder, to what extent would that put somebody at a disadvantage when they're applying to colleges? If let's say you're looking at, UCSD or UCLA or Stanford, and they're looking at your class transcript and they say, oh, well, this is a biology class that doesn't believe in evolution. I can't imagine that would be very beneficial for your admissions. But again, it's an issue in some parts of the country, but not much we can do about that. All right. Hope you enjoyed.